Chapter 10. Long Road. So many times, I thought I was at the end of a long road. But there was just another long road to conquer, one after another. After a while, it becomes a comfort. Eileen did what she could do to keep everyone feeling good about their situation. For months, no one was permitted to leave. At first they were trapped, and it took them some time to dig their way out. But by the beginning of fall, they saw daylight once again after the attack. She and the others didn't know exactly what happened. It was something that made the whole experience worse. Beneath the rubble, no one at the school could get a cell phone signal or a data signal to their phones. They weren't able to check the feeds to find out exactly what was happening in the larger world. All they had to go on was the world around them. Initially, she thought it was a terrorist attack on the city. It makes sense that someone would attack a big city like this, she thought. However, if that was the case, and this was an isolated attack on the cities, where were the WPF? It had become clear that something far worse had happened. No help had come. No help would come. Her and the children were making it through, however. They had food, warmth, and shelter in the school. They had Jeremy, who protected them. But it wasn't an ideal situation. The population that remained in the city had broken into tribes. The tribes competed for what precious resources remained. As the winter carried on, it was clear that no one was coming to save them. So the groups became aggressive, territorial. It had become a tribal living situation. Jeremy was protecting them, yes, but his iron-fisted, fear-invoking policies kept everyone on edge. He had little ability to keep them calm, to bring solace to the group. It seemed like another life now, when she considered how she arrived in the present situation. Jeremy and she had gone out a few times. It really wasn't becoming anything serious. It hadn't been long enough to make that consideration. Eileen had her assistant, Stella, back out on her for a lock-in, an overnighter she was doing with the kindergartners. It was supposed to be for the end of the summer jamboree. The thought of taking on all these kids alone was frightening. It just so happened that Jeremy called her just as she had the cancellation from Stella. He was trying to be cute, coming to see her that night. If he didn't show up, it would have been just her and the kids once the bombs hit. Jeremy was fantastic the first few weeks. He was calm and optimistic about their situation. But once they dug themselves out and they saw what had happened, Jeremy began to unravel. He recruited some other guys to join their tribe. At first, he would ask her about things. He involved her in the decision-making process for the group. But then, as the others joined them, it became clear that he no longer wanted her input. He was going to do what he was going to do now. The guys took care of her and the kids, but at the cost of any kind of freedom. There was a time where she romanced the idea of Jeremy. She was infatuated with him. She urged him to be her protector. They had shared a couple of nights, trapped beneath the rubble, bodies intertwined. He was falling for her, she knew. She considered it might be part of what was driving him to the extent he now lived in. She distanced herself from him. He didn't like it. He pushed harder. "What are you doing?" Jeremy asked. Eileen had the children lined up behind her, ready to take a walk. They filed down the dugout hallway, approaching the door. This activity was something that Jeremy was becoming more and more uneasy with. She stopped and cleared her throat. "We're going on our walk," she said, waiting for his reaction. "You're not going out," Jeremy said. "Too dangerous." Eileen sighed and walked towards him. The kids look forward to this, Jer, she whispered. I can't take this away from them. You're not going anywhere, Jeremy said firmly. Eileen looked at him for a long moment. She turned to walk out the door. One of Jeremy's men walked in front of them, not allowing them to pass. I said you're not going anywhere, Lynn, Jeremy said. We're not your prisoners, Eileen said, storming away, the line of kindergartners following behind her. It was sad that it had come to this. She needed to get out herself. Jeremy was too overbearing and controlling. Something had to be done. Eileen couldn't be the one. She was trapped. The kids were trapped. Okay, everyone, coats off, Eileen said. We're going to play inside instead. The children seemed to be okay with this and began stripping their coats and hats. We're going to have art time today. Louis, will you go with Emma to get a pail of water? She said, directing the children. Matt awoke to a tearing headache. He forced himself out of bed. There was little console in the things that one would normally find comforting, such as sleep. He awoke now to this realization. Though he was in pain, he no longer let it restrict him. Matt walked through the house after rising to talk to Jacobs and set some things straight. Jacobs' decision, made in exhaustion and anger, as well as some misplaced display of grandeur, put the whole group into danger. The enemy could have easily followed or tracked the helicopter that Jacobs stole from them and located the whole group. Matt did not understand how he could have been so stupid about the whole thing. No one but him could face him and force him to know that he had made a mistake. Matt would see to this right away. He ran into Charlotte in the kitchen cleaning. She was quirky in this way, and Matt respected her nervous act of comfort. Jacob's around? He asked. Yes. She looked out the back window, as if to point. There was the man himself, the old lunatic, kneeling on top the hill, looking out into the woods at the rear of the house. Matt sighed and looked to the floor, his hands on his hips. He headed out the door, up the hill he set up his attack on the night before. Jacobs. The man turned around, stared at Matt's call. You come to me and ask me if my head is in the game, and you pull that shit you did yesterday. You put everyone here in jeopardy. Your head was somewhere else. Then I guess it's clear to you why I had the concerns I did. He didn't break his stare into the horizon. When you were out of your head before, and me this time, Jacob said, completely calm, to Matt's angry tone. Matt couldn't believe it. He was beginning to doubt following him. Everything since the lodge had gone amiss. John was gone, the buses were gone, and Jacobs almost got everyone killed last night. Yeah, it's clear, and I kept it together. You're the one that was gone. You were the one that was out of your mind. Matt stared at him, hard and cold. Now I ask you, are you in this? Jacobs got up from his kneel, pausing for a brief second when he was up all the way. He walked straight up to Matt, staring him in the eye with a deadly stare, only inches from his face. In war, Blair, your mind is tested. I've been fighting this far longer than you. I've lost all that I've had and all that I've fought for. I won't let them take any more. When your mind steps outside its borders like mine did last night, that is when you step up like you did. You call me on my mistakes. I'll call you on yours. This, he paused, is how it has to be if it's going to work. Matt stared at him for a long second. Anger, fear, relief surged through him, a strange mix. He swung, decked him right in the jaw. He couldn't keep control of himself any longer. Jacobs turned with the strike and hunched slightly. It wasn't the anger. It wasn't the fear. He had let him down. He had let the rest of their people down. Matt shouted, Lost everything? Bullshit! You're no different than anyone else here. Is your head in the game? Answer me, you piece of shit! Jacob slowly stood up. This is the last time you ever hit me, Blair. You understand? Answer me! Matt returned, ignoring Jacob's attempt to maintain control of the situation. I am in, Jacobs yelled, punctuating each word. I have every right to kill you now. Jacobs did not have control of the situation. His strength wavered right before Matt's very eyes. Then kill me, Matt said, and stared right back into Jacob's brown eyes. Jacobs, switching tones again, calmly spoke. Blair, I told you. A man does only what he can to redeem himself. Now I let you hit me back. You believe I deserve that, but that is it. You lost your head, and I would have done exactly what you just did. It's settled. You better make sure your head stays on from now on. Matt turned and walked away. Jacob stared at Matt as he left. He knew Matt was right. He was so much like Alder, so moral. He always put everyone else first. He knew in his heart of hearts he had just let this boy down. Someone who counted on him, who needed him to be strong. He couldn't let him down like he did Alder or his own son. At times, he wanted to share an old story with Matt like he was Alder. And Alder reminded him of his son. But because Jacob saw so much of himself in Matt, even more so than Alder, reminded him of his mark. It was hard now. Maybe I am losing it, Jacobs thought. It had been long since he doubted himself, and this terrified him. He had lost control. He had almost destroyed everything he spent his life since the bombs went off, and even before. But Matt had brought this doubt in himself out in the open, where it was very real. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something about Matt. Perhaps something not yet fully revealed. At first, he believed he had found someone who could take orders and was strong. Someone with WPF background. It was clear now that he'd found something else. Someone who would challenge him and keep him in line. Someone who was growing in strength in these terrible times. Someone who he felt connected to in some strange way. Someone who represented simultaneously what he was fighting for and what he was scared to lose in himself. The honesty, the innocence, and the bravery and commitment it took to save these people, to face what they were up against every day out here on the road. Jacobs wiped the blood from his lip and turned to face the wilderness. As Matt walked away, he realized that in a more civilized time, they may have shared a moment. But in the wild, they could only hope the other knew what they went through. Jacobs fought the feeling of weakness his mistakes stirred in him. Perhaps there would be a time and place where him and Matt could share how they felt. But there was no time for these soft thoughts now. He had to be the one to save these people, to save Matt. Matt led the refugees now as they trailed out from the farm, heading north. Next to him walked Jacobs. Today's March 1st, Jacobs said. Matt said nothing. We'll need the warmer weather, Jacobs continued, but it's probably going to rain. A lot. How long till we get to the city? Matt asked, all business. Jacobs got out his map. Maybe a month, maybe two, it's hard to tell. Who knows what we run into, and we're not maintaining much of a pace. Jacobs turned to see the long line of travelers following them. He turned again, squinting at the noonday sun. We may run into our Chinese friends again. They have to be on the lookout for us. If not, a full-on search. We're too big of a group to just disappear. Other armies may be hesitant to move in this far yet. There is no telling exactly where all the bombs went off, and where there is still a lot of fallout concentration. Jacobs, I know you're not telling me everything. If we don't run into more armies, what will we run into? Jacobs did his usual failure to reply. Listen, Jacobs, I really need to know what's going on, especially if you lose your mind again. Matt. Jacobs had never really called him by his first name, and Matt was surprised he even remembered. The plan is to go through St. Paul and Minneapolis. People have to move away from there. It's the last big city before we get to our destination. We have to make one more stop, save more people, but we have to be quick. These people are beginning to exhaust. We can't take any more people, Matt said, his voice high. We have to. Or I have to. You said you were in this. Jacob shot a glare to Matt. His statement was a question. Why? Because, Matt, there was his first name again. Redemption. What the hell does that mean? Why do you keep saying that? You couldn't understand. Yet. Matt didn't even want to know. Jacob seemed to be half joking when he made these comments in the past. Yet he appeared to be serious now. He was just tired of this guy trying to hold all kinds of information from him and acting all wise for doing so. Matt decided in this moment, I will not be that kind of leader. A moment of silence passed. Jacobs wanted Matt to see the merit in his plan, to buy in. It was the only way it would work well. And still, Jacob seemed to at least attempt to get back to the lightness in his way. So, how's your little vacation going, Blair? Matt was strangely happy that Jacobs changed the subject. It was his strange element of humor. Nonetheless, appreciated. Yeah, right, Matt reported cynically, following the transition. I should be home right now, going to college. Matt thought if he played nice, he might be able to get more out of him. Oh yeah? What are you studying? Jacobs asked suddenly, becoming fatherly. I barely even started. I did some business management shit, but I don't really like it, Matt said dismissively. So, I just did the WPF thing. Well, what would you study? Jacobs asked. English. I want to be a writer, a poet. For the first time in Matt's life, this was not a problem to admit. After all, who cared at this point? Wow, I don't see it, Jacobs laughed. I used to write all the time. I'm not WPF material. I did it for the wrong reasons. A girl? Jacobs knew. Yeah, Matt said somberly. When the whole WPF thing got me 7 bullets in the chest, I sat in bed every day, hoping she would appear there in the doorway to visit. She never came. I didn't see her for 3 years. She didn't even care. Well, when a girl dumps a guy, she isn't going to go running back to him. She didn't dump me. Matt looked at Jacobs. Sounds complicated. You kids get so damn complicated, Jacobs said. It was. Matt had no reason not to open up. It was, in fact, the truth. Well, you never know. Maybe she joined the WPF looking for you. Maybe she's somewhere waiting for you to come back. Maybe she went through the same things. You are the one that left. No, she's gone. I just know it. I can feel it. I guess some things are like that, Jacob said. Strange. Things like that can't be explained. Matt chuckled. Seriously, Jacobs went on. Why do you think you were taking care of that little girl? Matt looked at him, wondering where he was going with this, and turned slightly, looking over his shoulder at Angela and Charla, who followed. It's more than just coincidence. I don't believe in fate anymore, Matt said. I was so ready to go back home, start over. Everything fell into place with me. Physically, I was all healed, and now this. Maybe you just haven't thought about it right. Maybe you need to let some time pass, Jacob said. No. It's bullshit, Matt said with some arrogance. Maybe it is, Jacobs added. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Jesus Christ, I have no idea. I haven't thought about it in a long time, Matt said. Well, you seem pretty cut out for WPF if you ask me, Jacob said. It was obvious the compliment hurt to give, though Jacobs tried to hide it. I hate this shit, Matt gave. Well, you don't want to do what you love. That would get old. Jacobs made a sarcastic face at Matt. Then, what would you love? Well, there isn't much I could do now after all this, Matt said. Do you know what this city is like that we're heading to? Yeah, I've been there, Jacobs said. What? Matt said. This guy's full of surprises. Matt tried not to act too interested and continued to watch his steps hit the ground. It's mostly underground, but they were building a courtyard above ground. It was beautiful, the way I remember it. You artists might have even more of an appreciation for it than I do. Angela asked me if we could have our own house when we got there, Matt said. Jacobs laughed. That's the only thing that got me across the lake the other night, Matt said with sobering sincerity. It's beautiful how a thing like that can save your life. Jacobs seemed to be enjoying a memory. Matt found himself struck by this. What about you? What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Matt asked, trying to mask his extreme curiosity. Blair, the last thing I want to think about now is my life. It's actually nice to hear about yours. Matt didn't exactly know how to respond to this. You know, you remind me of Alder, Jacobs said. I've said it before. He was with me for so many years. I haven't thought once about his death. I'm not even sure if I'm human anymore. Another comment Matt didn't have a reply to. The moment became awkward. Well, I'm going to run ahead, Jacob said. Stay with the others. And he was off. Jacobs is in rare form today, Matt thought. He couldn't help but think that he had somehow had some causal part in his change of disposition. He must have felt bad about his freak-out. He may have been trying to make it up to Matt. Show him that he was fine. Show him that he was human and capable of human interaction. But like Jacobs, Matt's focus changed to duty, and he raised his guard, scanning the landscape around him. Matt again turned to see those following behind him. The group was big, 80-some at his last count. They never complained. The amount of trust put in Matt, Jacobs, Davis, and Scott by these people was immeasurable. Not too far behind him, Matt saw Davis walking just ahead of everyone. Davis, Matt said, as he paused to let the followers catch up. How did everything go when I was gone? It gave everyone a chance to unwind, I guess. Charlotte made sure everyone was okay. Shrishti, she was very helpful in making sure everyone was somewhat comfortable. And Jack tried to ease everyone over with some light humor. Russ was a little in shock from everything. He stayed in the barn. I think he and Shrishti have something going on, if you know what I mean. Jacob's now walking with Matt. He elbowed him, illustrating his joke. The others are pretty quiet. They're scared, Blair. Their homes are gone. They have only to follow us. It's their only hope to live. Matt hardly knew any of the people he led. Hey, is there a woman and her son? They came to me one night and asked if they could help. Davis thought and looked perplexed. I think her name was Lisa. Blair, Davis said gravely. They must have been on John's bus. There's no children around but Angela. John, Matt said. Wonder if he made it. Matt had never talked to Davis like this. Davis could tell that something was now different in Matt. And like Jacobs, the thought of the long road ahead seemed to bring on a certain kind of loneliness. Matt wanted to share. Are you okay, Blair? Matt walked in his own thoughts for a moment. Yeah, I guess I can't help it. You just start tallying up your losses, you know. Davis said nothing. I still can't understand why anyone would do this, Matt said, or let it happen. I'm not even sure what happened. Matt laughed. All these people's lives have been taken from them. They're just afraid now. This is all they have, fear. Maybe the ones who died are the lucky ones, Matt thought. He was surprised at this thought. All of us who survive can only try to make sense of it. try to bring some sort of order, some sort of understanding out of it all. Davis gave no reply to Matt's rhetoric. As if breaking out of reverie, Matt turned to Davis. "Keep taking care of these people, man. You're the best we've got." Matt ran ahead, keeping distance between him and the group to see if there was any word from Jacobs, who was now out of sight. March now brought to them days of quiet. Matt hated the discrepancy between the dynamics of action and boredom. It was either fight for your life or wait to fight for your life. He had sat at the lodge for all those months, and then he gets in the line of fire again. Before that, he lay in bed for months on end after fighting for his life. But he was one of the lucky ones. Matt could fight for his life. Some just don't have it in their hearts, Matt thought. The long first week of March gave plenty of time for Matt to go over everything in his mind. He relived it like a daydream, day in and day out. The wounds in his chest, the vacation, Stephanie, his family, the plane crash, Angela, the embassy. Trying to find the justice in everything was too hard for him to do right here in the middle of these events. Instead, he began talking to the people, reaching out to fight the loneliness. A human being needs hope, Matt philosophized. All his dreaming, his vacation, it was all to give him hope. The adventure he went on with Becky and Jamie, it gave Matt hope for something else. Angela, she was his hope. Hope. I have to do everything to protect it. And so in his conversations with the others, he asked them about their future and what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives, just as Jacobs had asked him. Hope always overcomes fear. Matt took note. It helped him understand what the soldier was going through. Jacobs always had himself he could rely on. And he almost lost that, or at least now he questioned it. But Jacobs needed hope, just as any human being did. Jacobs, Scott, Davis, Russ, Jack, Shrishti, and everyone else were in the middle of a hopeless terrain. Igniting hope in men's hearts was the only thing that gave all of this any worth. Jacobs was teaching this to Matt, though perhaps he didn't realize it. The hope in the refugees' hearts had to become Matt's hope. The more he learned of them and their hopes, the more he had hope for himself. Matt was finding that he had now been known to the many, though he did not know them. He wanted to go around to each of them, for their spirits as well as his own. The people had many questions that Matt could not answer, but he instilled in them that there was going to be a future. Everyone needed to hear this, even Matt, from his own mouth. Well, after my brother screwed up the account, I totally lost it. I just left town. I just drove. The business was going to fold without that account. Hundreds of thousands lost. It was a make or break it thing, or at least I thought. It doesn't seem like such a big deal now. It was my fault. I thought my life was over. The campfire shone on the man's face as he told his story. The same brand of story everyone had. He was always screwing everything up. I wanted to go into business with him to help him, you know? To try to get him some kind of self-worth. The man paused. I'll never see him again. I'm sure he'll understand. The man walked out from the darkness. They embraced. It appeared to be the man who was speaking's father, by his older appearance. As they hugged, the speaker cried. I'll never get to tell him, and it's all I think about now. Those sitting by the fire watched the scene as if it was out of a dream, but it wasn't. This was reality. Your brother idolized you. He was never meant for that kind of work. You gave him a chance, and that's all he could ever want from you, said the older man. The other man cried harder. As he sat back down on the floor, he broke down, spoke. I threw him out. I told him he was a fuck-up and I never wanted to see him again. The man sobered. As he gave the last bit, and none of it even mattered. Not now. The man stared into the fire, and the crackle was all that could be heard. The wide-open fields of Wisconsin surrounded them this night, and the spring season had brought a warm night to the dirty, torn travelers. In the distance, other fires and other stories could be heard and seen. After a time of silence, small conversations broke out around the 10 or so that congregated by the fire. "I wish I could get a bath," one older woman said to another. "Oh my gosh, I know. Wow, that is one thing I miss so much." After sitting in silence, watching the scenes around him, Matt spoke. "Well, you'll have your own shower when we get to the city." The excitement Matt's words brought, revealing the once simple pleasure, were enough to fire the woman's spirits and keep them going. Matt admired the simplicity of it. Hope. "Do you think they will have room service?" one of the women asked and laughed. "I wouldn't push your luck," Matt said. Another woman sitting by the fire began to tell her story. She was somber, in reverie. "I was at this tavern a few weeks before the whole thing. There was this guy there. It was my birthday. We dated, I guess. I made the mistake of falling in love with him. He didn't love me, though. He had fallen for someone else. They were really perfect for each other. I didn't care. I told him that I loved him more than anyone. He tried to leave. I wouldn't let him." She paused. Everyone's attention paid towards her. "I told him everything that was on my mind. He listened and told me that I should just go back with my friends and enjoy the birthday party. How could I enjoy my party when he was going to go out with her? When he just left me there on my birthday?" She began to cry. "I loved him," she said, and she paused. "I'm sorry. It's a sad, stupid story. I guess I just miss him. I'm sorry." She drifted off in her speech, dispatching her audience. Matt thought of the love he had and related to her story. But he felt it far more important that everyone else take in the hope of her love, and that her heart would find what it desired. Matt took note that it became much more important for everyone else to hear the story and apply it to their own use of hope. Matt had begun to understand that hope was the prime concern and drive for their survival. The sad story of love lost was no longer just for his own reflection. "I've grown," Matt thought. Matt looked around other firelit faces and saw that all were not infected with the hope he wished to spread. Their faces were tired, and they interacted little with the group. "Hey, how are you guys?" Matt asked in their direction. "You holding up all right?" One man glanced and shook his head at Matt. "What are you guys going to do when things get back to normal?" Matt asked. "I don't think things are going to get back to normal," one of the men said. The men were smaller, and not exactly the type that could weather this type of roughness. In their mid-30s, not being in very good shape, they felt demeaned by having to follow and not having the desire to lead. These men were hit the hardest. Matt didn't know what to say, but he knew they had to speak of their lives. What they lost had left with them nothing. Matt put aside his etiquette. "So what's your story?" Matt asked the one who sat closest to him. "I have no story. I lost everything long before this." "Yeah?" Matt said. "I was divorced. My wife, she was a bitch. She left me. She said that I worked too much. She found love from some Italian fuck. I lost my job. She gets everything. The world ends. And here I sit, waiting to die." He looked from the fire, stared back at Matt. Everyone sitting around the fire suddenly went silent at the man's words and his horrible, cynical laughter that preceded his speech. "So you're just waiting to die?" Matt said sarcastically. "You don't think we're all going to get sick and die here?" the man said. "The water we drink will do us all in. We're literally breathing poison. If there weren't any cowards among us, they'd be ending it all themselves. But we're all too scared to do that. There really is no reason to go on." Everyone stared at the man who brought this dark prophesizing to them. The fear was thick in the air, induced by his words. "But we'll go on," he said. "You'll be thinking that things will get better, just like all of us did before any of this happened. Did it ever get any better? No." Another man shouted back now. "Hey, we didn't go fucking up our lives like you did. Some of us would like to live, so speak for yourself, you asshole." chatter broke out in praise of the argument. The man gave a devilish grin at the other. See, you just hold on to that idea that things will get better. Some fucking chinks blew up our country, man. We're dead, he called back. Matt kept a stern and intense look at the man who spoke so pessimistically. We were too nice. The game is, who nukes who first? We lost. We spent decades helping countries get nuclear weapons. How stupid are we? The man now met Matt's stare once again. Why don't you just shut up for a while? Matt said as reasonably as he could conjure. The man hated his suggestion, very cynically. Matt stood up to find Angela and kiss her goodnight. He could not believe how much he was affected by the man's speech. It had taken him by surprise and caused him, his own hope, to falter. As he walked, he tried to shake it. He began thinking of his life and that he really possessed nothing in the first place. He had a rocky history, and that was about it. I have to keep my hope, or these people will not even want to make it. As Matt walked, he heard a voice in the distance shouting for him. Blair, you're on watch. Give me a few minutes and I'll be there, Matt shouted back to the shadowy figure. But Matt thought on. Maybe the guy's right. Things will never be the same. Matt fought with the thoughts he was having. He felt the warm breeze on his face, and in his heart, his life was belittled. What hope did he have for the future? What could he hope to be? His life would always be lived in this way now, either out there or at a city that everyone hoped to find. The man's words were a cancer. If they had infected Matt, they had to have infected the others. He trudged on and approached the circle of people around the fire. There was Charla, holding Angela. Almost as if she was waiting for him, Angela saw him and called for him. Matty, she called. Jacobs came to relieve Matt after his watch. It was still dark. It had to be 4 a.m. by Matt's estimate. Pretty quiet, Jacobs said. Yeah, Matt replied. I'm going to try to get a few hours of sleep. He made his way back to the simmering fire where Angela slept. He made sure she was coddled in her sheet and warm. He pulled her close to him, and she adjusted herself, putting her arm around him. Matt looked into the clouded, dark night. The sky black, the slight sound of wind. Matt closed his eyes. He still tried to put the man's cancerous words out of his mind. But the words made him feel as if his hope was foolish. They were all destined to die. Matt promised everyone showers today once they got to the city. There was no way he could know if there was showers there. Jacobs had not told him even a small detail. He knew almost nothing about where they were going or what they would do there. What if the man was right? What if they did get there, but they all died of radiation poisoning? What if they all died in terrible pain? What if hope was the intoxicant of a doomed people? He was running through the forest. It was cold, but he could not feel it in his body. He was weightless, yet drenched with sin and burden. Someone was chasing him. The trees were frosted white, as if frail bones of the forest. There was no moon. There was no light. There was no steam from his breath. He had to get the upper hand. He stopped and put his back against the tree and pulled his knife, ready for attack. He heard a rustling in the distance, like footsteps through the leaves. He waited for them to approach. The steps got louder, but they stopped. There were no more sounds. Seconds passed. Had they heard him? Had they seen him? Perhaps they were waiting for him to make his move, and they would attack. He could not remember the purpose of what he was doing in the woods this night. It was just out of reach of his mind. Somewhere in the foggy periphery where he could make out blurs, but no discernible images. All he knew in this moment was that they were after him, and he had to save someone. He could not remember, and it was not important. Only the act, only what he had to do, mattered. He heard another rustle, but it was some ways off. Matt searched in the darkness, looking for some evidence of someone in the distance. There was a white blur in the remoteness. Was it a man? Matt extended his neck, peering into the distance. He saw a figure some 20 yards away. It was a man. He didn't seem to try to hide himself. As a matter of fact, he seemed to be facing Matt, staring right back at him. He was a dark-skinned man, white hair, not at all dressed for this cold weather. Matt tried to make sense of it, and could feel his brow squint as a result. Suddenly, there was no air in his lungs, and there was a darkness in his field of view. He had been thrown to the ground. He turned to see a man in a beige-green uniform of those at the land bridge, charging him with a sword. Matt jumped to his feet and punched him with all of his rage. The man's feet went into the air with a strike, and Matt's punch caused blood to explode all over his fist. The man tried to get up, and Matt went after him, his body fueled with rage. Matt found his knife on the ground and picked it up. He lifted the man by his hair and turned him around. He positioned the knife to cut the man's throat when something caught his eye. The man in the distance now stood closer. He was in beige linen. His braids blew in the cold wind. He stood there, his eyes fixed on him. Matt was filled with anticipation, confusion. The man's eyes began to fill with light. He opened his mouth. The light poured from the opening. A blinding light, increasing in intensity. A slight sound filled Matt's mind and grew. It was the sound of a whisper, scratchy and soft, but it grew louder and more powerful. Matt could not make much out of the words, if they were words. The sound grew with the light, and now Matt could not bear it anymore. He covered his ears, but this did nothing to dampen the sound. He dropped the man, who rose and began to run. Matt could hear himself begin to make moaning sounds that one makes when coping with pain. It became a scream. Matt kicked, waking himself. He was covered in sweat. Breathing heavily, he looked to see that he did not wake Angela. She let out a sigh and adjusted herself, rolling over. Matt rose and walked to the edge of the camp. He felt claustrophobic and needed to get to open spaces. What the hell was that? Matt asked himself, catching his breath. Matt had not had a dream like that in what seemed like forever, and they always seemed to perplex him for days. He could never put his finger on it. He just dwelled on them day after day. Was his subconscious trying to get him a message? He did not know, but this one would stick with him. Jacobs stood watching the sunrise over the western horizon. Once the sun rose, he would have to rouse the group and get on with their walk. Like clockwork, even though the world seemed to be in ruins, the world was suddenly filled with light again. He turned and headed back to the camp. "Rise and shine, everyone," Jacobs called as he walked through the camp. They began sitting up, rubbing their eyes. Before long, they would be on the move. Matt found Scott, briefed him on the plans for the day. "We get everyone moving within the hour," Jacobs explained. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." After a short while, everyone was up and ready to be given the direction. "Blair, everyone's accounted for." "Yeah, I think so," Matt replied. Russ came running up to Matt and Jacobs as they spoke. "There's a problem," Russ said. "I only count 82. We're one short." Jacobs looked around, glaring, not turning his head. "Blair, you take the north tree line. Russ, you take the south. I'll go west, Scott, you east. We meet back here in a half hour." The group split with their assignments. Jacobs jogged back to where he had spent most of his watch. He scanned the hills for signs of life. Nothing. He walked through the western tree line, rustling through the foliage that persisted through the cold, semi-frozen ground. There was no one to be found. He looked back towards the camp and saw Blair running towards him. "Jacobs, come with me," he said with urgency. He and Blair ran to the tree line about a quarter of a mile. They stopped. Before the two men was a smaller man, bloody and broken. "I just talked to this guy last night," Matt said. "He was a real bundle of joy, let me tell you." The man was dead. Murdered, it seemed. Jacobs looked around and behind them. "Blair, you know who would have done this?" Matt shook his head. "He was going on last night, how we were all going to die. Really freaking people out." Jacobs looked at Matt with all seriousness. "You didn't do this, did you, Blair?" Matt stood up. "Are you serious?" Jacobs looked away. "Listen, we aren't going to tell anybody about this, okay?" Jacobs said, giving orders. "If what you say is true, no one will miss him anyway." "But we still don't know who did this," Matt said. "We'll have to keep watching the group as well. Whoever he spooked, he really scared." The two men looked at the dead body before them. His right eye was open. His left, swollen shut. His left arm was obviously broken, as if he lay twisted on the ground. Jacobs turned and began running the other way, back towards the group. Matt came up from behind. "Anything?" Scott asked. "No," Jacobs said. "Nothing." Matt couldn't even look at Russ or Davis. The lie didn't sit well with him. "Let's get everyone moving," Jacobs said. Jacobs punished himself. How could I have not seen this? He thought. He hated that he suspected Blair, but he wouldn't be doing his job if he looked at it any other way. There was a killer in their midst. They had to be vigilant and protect the rest of the group. He couldn't bring a killer to the city. He would surely act again. This type could never hide for long. This has been a presentation of The Landscape of a Heart by R.P. Watts. Copyright 2020. Next week, join us for Chapter 11, Twin Cities. Subscribe to this feed. Thank you.